6 days to polling. We're live in Glasgow with voters who are concerned about the cost of living crisis, about migration and the future shape of the UK. And with them, political leaders whose job it is to provide some answers. Good evening and welcome to Newsnight, live in Glasgow. We're in the city's most iconic buildings, the Old Fruit Market, almost 2 centuries old. But the debate will be very much alive and in the here and now. In front of our audience, Ian Murray, Labour's Shadow Scotland Secretary, Kate Forbes, the Deputy Leader of the SNP, Conservative MSP Miles Briggs, the Leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Alex Cole-Hamilton, and the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party, Patrick Harvey. And our political editor, Nick Watt, is also here on hand. Our audience tonight is broadly representative of the way people voted at the last general election in Scotland. And there are some people here who are going to raise issues that are very close to their heart. So let's hear from them. And first, June Ramsey, you're a nurse. Tell me your story.
I work in Glasgow. I also work for the Royal College of Nursing as well, and we conducted a study looking at students and their finances, and through that we got a lot of feedback on how they just weren't managing, and was the option available to them to have food banks, and that's also the case with trained nurses all over Glasgow. Fuel costs, just the general costs of living, etc. So we're in the process of thinking, is that something that we might have to do?
So you're working at one of the biggest teaching hospitals in Europe.
Yep.
You're working at the Royal College of Nursing.
Yep. And
not just student nurses, but nurses need food banks.
Yes. It's very sad. Very, very sad. It's a good wage, but because of the cost of living, everything goes up. You know, we're travelling to work, we're paying for petrol, rents are going up, gas bills are going up, etc., and our wages just aren't going up in correlation. So it's a real struggle for a lot of people.
And do you think people will leave to try and find better jobs?
Yeah, a lot of people have left because they've been able to access their pension because they're in need of money for that. Some of the students, we were lucky enough to have a debate the Parliament not that long ago, and they invited some of the students along, and some of the students said they do a full-time job in addition to doing their nurse training.
And that shows great dedication to want to being a nurse. Yeah,
it is, and it's a great job. It's just if we could get a fair pay for what we do. You know, we're a critical profession, and it's really sad to see people having to drop out just because they can't afford to come to work.
Now, I want to hear, Zahada Zafar, your story, please.
I'm a single mother. I suffer from chronic pain, and I have 2 children currently at university. I've suffered from chronic pain from pretty much the age of 18, but I carried on working, and it's got to the point, because of my age, I think, it's just got so much. Walking is an issue for me, standing is an issue for me. I just can't seem to win in life, you know. I don't know.
So you can't work, and what does that mean for the income you have? You've presumably got some benefits, but what does it mean in terms of the way you can live your life?
In recent years, since the COVID pandemic and the cost of living crisis and the energy increasing dramatically, it's just become diabolical. I just cannot manage anymore. Money, bills and food are going on credit cards, you know, and I can't even pay off my credit cards. I'm a person that doesn't drink, I don't smoke, I don't go out. I was very, very careful with my money, but it's got to the point I just can't manage. I own my own flat, and I've been there for 22 years, and I can't afford repairs.
So you can't afford repairs, and it's kind of heat or eat?
Yes, it's heat or eat, and as a parent of children at university, I'm the one that suffers because I'm a mum. It doesn't matter how old your children are. You know, you've got to, as a parent, you take the brunt of it. You know, when it comes to food, I don't have the money to buy food, so what do? My kids have the food, it keeps the peace in my house, and I do without.
Well, you know, Miles Briggs, from the Conservative point of view, it's heat or eat. It's nurses and student nurses leaving the profession, taking another job, needing a food bank. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, and I think all of us on the panel and everyone who's shared their stories tonight will be aware of just how difficult things have been, that global pandemic, the cost of living, which we've seen increase. And that's where UK government have tried to assist where we can, in terms of the £400 energy heat support, which every household's been entitled to, and also looking towards where additional support can be provided. You mentioned chronic pain. I actually co-chair the chronic pain cross-party group in the Scottish Parliament. And actually providing services to help people get into employment just isn't being provided in Scotland. We've seen the Scottish Government actually cut the employability schemes in Scotland. So we need to see this change, and both governments need to be working together to help deliver better outcomes for everyone.
Well, of course, this is a UK election. Health is a devolved issue, but it's all part and parcel of how people make their minds up about how they're going to vote in a general election. And your record for the SNP, Kate Forbes, on the question of the cost of living crisis and on the question of making sure the medical profession is a critical profession, as Jane was saying, and it's not working.
Well, can I just say that this election is about making things different for both of you and for people the length and breadth of the country. Your stories are backed up by the research. Here in Glasgow, research that suggests the cost of living crisis is meaning people are dying. So poverty is leading to excess deaths.
But Scotland's a chance to vary its income tax, which you do.
Which we have done. And it's actually with that progressive taxation that we've been able to do more, for example, in protecting children who are currently in poverty and ensuring that nurses, for example, are paid more on average across the UK when they get into work.
But because health has been devolved for such a long time, there's more presumably you could have done to make sure that student nurses don't need a second job, don't need a food bank.
Well, and actually, of course, we are the only part of the UK that's protected bursaries for nurses because we recognise the importance of supporting our nurses. And I know that because my daughter is a trainee nurse and I know how important it is that we have nurses going in to the workforce. This election needs to be about changing this once and for all. Do you know the great injustice is that Scotland is a net producer of energy, and yet by July this year, you will be paying at least £300 more than you were 2 years ago, despite the fact that the energy is transmitted past your house.
Well, we're going to come on and talk about energy in this, but I just want to stick to this question of inequality and poverty. Now, Ian Murray, one of the campaigning, the biggest element of the campaign when you won the Rutherglen by-election, the candidate, now the second Labour MP in Scotland, Michael Shanks, said that the cap on two-child benefit was heinous. If it's heinous, why is that not a priority for you to lift it?
Well, nothing highlights the failure of the two current governments we've got in Scotland than the stories we've just heard. And we do hear from Kate about how they're trying to invest in public services. They're sacking teachers in Glasgow, and I'm coming to that. And the priorities of the Scottish Government in terms of these issues that are here are to tax you more as a nurse than to take more tax off.
But wait a minute, let's just be quite clear. Let's be quite clear. Labour's position in Scotland at the Rutherglen by-election, repeated time and again by Anna Sawar, was we absolutely want the two-child cap on benefit lifted, and now.
And we do.
You do, but it's not a manifesto commitment to do it. You're not going to do it.
Because what we've been highlighting here is the cost of living crisis that people are being affected by, partially caused, if not mostly caused, by the reckless economic decisions made by the Conservative government, crashing the economy, pushing up interest rates for the mortgages of the lady who's got a mortgage and been in her house for 22 years, pushing up the costs for the nurses and the trainee nurses. So we've put a manifesto together. There's nothing in that manifesto that's not fully costed and showing where the money comes from. And let me just
why can the only other Scottish Labour MP call the cap on benefit heinous, and it's not something that you will remove immediately? And of course, Gordon Brown.
Well, the two things are that I would say on this. We've got a full review of universal credit, of which the two-child cap is part of it.
You could lift it
it's
now.
It's only ever Labour governments that pull people out of poverty, and we'll do that again. We'll have a full anti-poverty strategy. And incidentally, Kate could make that decision if she wanted to
we have with the
in the
Scottish
Scottish Government
so
as well, but I've decided not to for the same reason that we can. We cannot promise something.
You've
It's time
lifted the cap on bankers' bonuses.
We cannot promise
something.
We cannot promise something that we cannot deliver. We need to be honest with the public.
You've lifted the cap
and when the money's
on bankers'
available,
bonuses.
all of these things will be looked at. And I can't understand how the former Finance Secretary in Scotland thinks lifting the bankers' bonus cap costs any money.
But why not lift the cap on children in
poverty? Alex Cole-Hamilton, the Liberal Democrat position on...
Well, we would remove the two-child cap in a heartbeat because it is iniquitous. It removes dignity. It doesn't recognise real poverty that is being experienced by families, some of whom are also in work. But I come back to the original questions. And for Liberal Democrats, there is a fundamental link between the health of our economy and the health of our nation. And forgive me, I forget your name, but the second question there is really important. My heart goes out to you. But there are many, many Scots in your position. 1 in 7 Scots right now are currently on an NHS waiting list. 170,000 Scots are suffering long COVID, many of whom can't go to work. And the same is true for the people on waiting lists. If we can't solve the crisis in our NHS, we can't grow our economy, we can't help these people back to work so that they can earn the levels of income they need to enjoy their lives. And that's a fundamental problem.
But one of the ways, we're talking about energy costs, for example. Patrick Harvey, interestingly, from the Greens' point of view, in terms of energy, and of course we hear from Labour it's going to be GB Energy, though we don't know where it is, and we actually don't know how it's going to operate with the grid in the situation it's in. But you, interestingly, I think I'm right in saying this, want to do a case-by-case basis in transition on oil and gas licences. You become possibly a little pragmatic?
No, I think you're describing the SNP's position on a case-by-case basis. We're opposed to new oil and gas licences because the argument is the same in all cases. The world has far more fossil fuel in existing reserves than we can afford to use. So the argument for new fossil fuel infrastructure and supply is bad environmentally and it's also bad economically. But if we want our energy system to be affordable, if you remember back to the tail end of last year, Rishi Sunak scrapped a bunch of climate policies because he said he wanted to make net zero more affordable for people, and none of it achieved more affordability. If he wanted to do that, break the link between electricity and gas prices. Everybody here and at home is paying artificially high prices for electricity, which is the cheapest energy that we can generate. Renewables,
well, let's talk to the audience of energy. What do people feel about their
bills?
What do people feel about their bills here? Yes, I'd like to take the woman with the turquoise jacket on, please. And please say your name.
My name is Comfort. Please don't forget that. I would say, I want to say something concerning the cost of living. I pay a lot when it comes to gas and electricity. Per week, I pay £40 separately, not just for my gas and electric. I mean, £80 for both of them. It runs like water. So what can be done to this? This is really affecting everyone. I need answers, please.
Ian Murray, what can be done?
Well,
I mean, let's be quite clear. You oppose new oil and gas...
You keep asking me a question.
No, but you oppose new oil and gas licences.
We do oppose new oil and gas licences, but what we want to do is to move away to clean energy by 2030. That's what GB Energy is all about. It'll be headquartered here in Scotland.
And when will it be up and running?
It's going to be up and running within months of the new Labour government coming in. The first 6 steps...
But look at what Ed Miliband said, that it was going to look like a European example. Now, if you look what you're going to be putting in, as it were, for seed funding, which is 4-something billion, EDF in France have got 18 billion.
No, we're putting in 8.3 billion to GB Energy. We're putting 7.3 billion into the National Wealth Fund. It's all to do with infrastructure. It's all to do with the grid. Private finance will bring in 3 to 4 times that in order to supplement it. This is about a government saying this is a national mission for us to get to clean power by 2030, and this is how we're going to deliver it. Or we can continue to stick our head in the sand and do nothing, and these bills will never come down.
Will GB Energy reduce Comfort's bills?
Yes.
By how much?
Well, the analysis shows by about £300
it's going up
a year.
£300
but what we
in
need
July.
But what we need to do is we need to get away from being over-reliant on dictators like Putin. We need to make sure we've got our homegrown energy through GB energy and 100% renewables. We need to invest in our port infrastructure, give us those careers of the future, and transition away from oil and gas. We'll be taking that out of the ground for the next 50 years because we're required to do so.
Okay.
So it's got to be a long-term plan to sort this. I
want to talk about one other thing before I want to go back to the audience for some reaction to this. I want to talk about one other thing. One of a possible incoming Labour government's policies will be VAT on private schools. Now, I just want to ask you, that's going to raise you, you think, a lot of money.
1.6 billion.
1.6 billion. Do you think the leader of Labour in Scotland, Anna Sarwar, will be happy to pay that VAT?
Well, I don't know if people will be happy, but they should be paying it because this
because
is
he sends his kids to private school.
I think people make their choices if they so wish to do so, but this is about lifting the boats in the state sector. Now, the big issue here, which I think maybe one or two of our panellists might want to answer, if the £160 million a year comes to Scotland in Barnett consequentials from the money from VAT on schools, is it going to be spent on education? Because it should be.
So
it will be across the rest of the UK.
Around 20% of children in Ian's constituency go to private schools. I know many of your voters are really angry with this policy. I don't think Labour's cost it at all. This money will not come towards state sector schools and trying to fund them. We will see more children going into schools because parents will have these bills. We will see children's education disrupted. I think that's one of the huge injustices many people want to know. But to go back to Comfort's point, because I think it's really important, we need energy security. And here in Scotland, in the northeast of Scotland, we should be proud of the fact that our oil and gas industry has given us that. All the other parties are threatening that at this election. And we need to, well, these are global pricing, as you know, but making sure that we do not then become reliant, and I agree with Ian on this, on dictatorships around the world is something we need to make sure this
Can I just have a show? I just want a show of hands now on the audience. As inflation's falling, as you hear what our panel is saying, I want you to raise your hand if you actually have some optimism on the economy.
Nobody. And that's not surprising.
OK, very quickly, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Well, and I think many of the people in this audience will also be carers. And actually, carers are feeling the cost of living more than almost anybody else. 50% of our unpaid carers are finding it hard to make ends meet. 30% are going without food. These are people whose love for their family members both governments are exploiting because they know that if they gave up, that we couldn't accommodate them in our hospitals. That's why Lib Dems want to increase carers' allowance by £1,000 every single year.
Thank you very much. Well, you can now listen to a live audio version of the programme, along with all of the BBC's election coverage on the Election 2024 stream on BBC Sound. Just head to the Sounds app to find the stream right between 5 Live, Sports Extra and 6 Music. Now, during the campaign, the issue of migration has become a key battleground in England. In Scotland, the migration story is a little bit different. In a moment, we're going to hear from Stephen Montgomery. But first, back to you, Comfort, on the whole question of migration.
So I've been in Scotland since 2019, and I would say the people of Scotland are the best people in the world. I mean, Scotland is a multi-diverse country, very welcoming, everybody's nice. And that kind of like bothers me a lot because I've come to this country and I've integrated. I try to give back by volunteering, by working, because this country has sowed a really good seed in my life. And I'm also trying to give back. But it breaks my heart to see that they want to cut off migration. So please tell me, what's going to happen? What's the answers to this? How can you help Comfort, considering me telling you my story right now?
Thank you very much, Comfort. And I'm just going to say that you came as a refugee and you settled here and sought asylum in 2019 and settled here.
Yes.
And what is your life like now?
Well, better, really good, unlike before. Even though I still struggle, thank God we talked about the cost of living crisis and all of that. There's a lot of poverty and everything going on. But I would say from then till now, it's been really great. Scotland is my home, my heart. Scotland is my heart, to be honest. I'm really happy being here.
Well, let's hear about migration from someone in the business community. Stephen Montgomery, you're chair of the Scottish Hospitality Group. Tell me your approach and your attitude towards migration.
I think migration into Scotland is one of the big things that happened from Brexit. You know, hospitality suffered massively. and through that. Now, Brexit wasn't the only cause. We had people left when the pandemic came, lockdown happened, to move back to their own countries, and hospitality shortages is worldwide. It's just not here in Scotland. So one of the worst things that the UK government, and I've got to be critical of the UK government here, is they raised the wage structure for people from 26,500 to 37,000, 38,000. Now, 38,000 goes somewhere in London, South Coast, but it goes a difference here in Scotland. That affordability for any business, certainly in hospitality, is, we all want to pay great wages, of course we do.
But you're suffering trying to find...
Yeah, absolutely. But
is migration the answer to that?
It's 50-50. We need homegrown, educated people to come into our work, of course we do. But we need to have some kind of, possibly a visa for Scotland. I think we would be up for that. But there would have to be certain caveats around that, you know, whether it be contracts,
special visa
wages.
for Scotland, and we can ask the others if that's possible.
Yeah.
It's not a devolved issue. Miles Briggs, do you accept that Scotland right now needs more migration?
So, yes, I do. And I think one of the things which I think is interesting, and something for those of us who are MSPs on this panel, is why people haven't actually come to Scotland. We know the levels of migration we've seen to the UK, but we've not seen that in terms of people coming to Scotland.
Let me just ask you that. That's interesting, because in effect you take, in a sense, a devolved view on this. So that you accept that Scotland needs more migration, even if your colleagues in Scotland and also south of the border disagree with you.
So we have sector skill shortages. We know that, from the rural agricultural sector right through to our hospital and NHS setting as well. And we're not training people in Scotland either. We see some of the lowest levels of Scots going to medical school, for example, to work in our NHS. More international students are studying than Scottish students now at our medical schools. So we need to see that investment. We haven't, sadly, after 17 years of this SNP government. But I think it's important we ask ourselves the question why people haven't come to live and work in Scotland. We want to be welcoming. We want to make this country the best it can be. But we need to ask ourselves,
why haven't they come, Kate Forbes?
Well, they have. And you can look at the
HMRC
figures, for example. HMRC statistics demonstrate that there's net migration to Scotland. Since 2017, we have quite considerable numbers coming to Scotland, certainly more than are leaving Scotland. But I think Comfort and Stephen both illustrate the reasons why we are unashamedly pro-immigration. For moral reasons, ethical reasons, and for economic reasons. We are a small country of 5 million people. We want to be open, we want to be welcoming, and I am horrified at the way that both Labour and the Conservatives are doubling down on this anti-immigration rhetoric.
Before we go on to Labour on that, just why aren't we building enough talent? We've got the talent.
Oh, we do.
Why are we building them out of
talent? We've got incredible talent.
The butchers we need.
We've got incredible talent, and I think there's probably a number of businesses here which illustrate the talent that we have. You know, you talk to international businesses that have chosen to locate in Scotland, and all of them will tell you the primary reason is the access to talent. But we're a small country of 5 million people. We want more.
Ian Murray, would a Labour government accept that Scotland's position is different on migration? After all, you support devolution, don't you?
Yes, but I think there's three parts to this migration issue. There's the technicalities of who comes into the country, and I think we want to strengthen the Migration Advisory Committee to set the kind of levels that we want, to make sure we get the sectors correct and the geographies correct in terms of what people need in the economy. The second big one, though, of course, is the infrastructure. So much of the discussion we have about migration is in the rural areas of the country, in places where there needs to be high employment, but there's low housing, there's low infrastructure.
But do you want some kind of derogation for Scotland to address the fact that we have got specific needs?
We would strengthen the Scottish voices on the Migration Advisory Committee to set the sectors and the geographies of where people need to go and what the economy needs. That's the right way to do it. But the third thing that goes is we've no workforce plans in these countries, in our country, at all. So we don't know what we need for the future, and we don't know how to train them up. And while you're gutting college funding and colleges are threatening to go on strike, that's your pipeline of future workforce. So until you solve those three things, you can't really solve Stephen's problem in the hospitality sector or Comfort's problem about people wanting to come and live here.
You want to, as it were, reimagine Brexit in certain ways. And Nick, I want to come to you on this, because what has the response been to Labour's overtures on that?
Well, we had an interesting intervention from Michel Barnier this week, who, of course, led the Brexit negotiations with the UK. And it was an interview with the Daily Telegraph, and I think the sort of headlines didn't quite capture what he was saying. The headlines seemed to suggest that a closer relationship with the European Union will mean free movement, which is obviously a red line that Keir Starmer's not willing to accept. Actually, what Michel Barnier said is if you want access to the single market, full access, you'd need free movement. Keir Starmer is not talking about full access to the single market because he knows that he cannot have free movement. Michel Barnier did say some things that Keir Starmer would be able to live with. He was talking about having a closer relationship between the UK and the EU. That's fine. That's what Keir Starmer is talking about. Michel Barnier was also talking about having agreements on things like Ukraine and terrorism, anti-terrorism agreements, and also talking about a veterinary agreement to ease those border checks. That is exactly what Keir Starmer is talking about. Two things not so easy for Keir Starmer. Michel Barnier was saying, I'm not sure what I'm hearing back from the Labour Party about a deal on chemicals. That sounds like you want a sweetheart deal on the single market. Not going to have that. And reminding Keir Starmer that in 2026 there has to be a renegotiation over access to UK fishing, and that would mean giving them access to the energy market.
So it won't work.
Well, I think you've heard that most of the things that Keir Starmer's been talking about, Michel Barnier has said would be possible. And I think one of the key things we have to do initially is to repair our tattered relationship with the European Union in order to try and make these negotiations
all these
better.
things you want will not come unless you trade free movement.
Can I just say, though, it's the most obvious thing in the world to say...
It's the most important part for Scotland.
Well, let me just finish this point. Because this is really important.
It is.
It's the most obvious thing in the world to say that if you want access to the single market, you have to abide by its rules. And part of those rules are free movement. So therefore, all these other issues that Nick's just talked about are on the table.
OK, well, first of all, Patrick Harvey, we haven't heard from you for a minute. What do you make of that?
If it's possible for someone who supports freedom of movement on principle to get a word in, can I first say directly to Comfort, I'm really pleased that you've had such a positive experience here and Scotland is lucky to have you. And in relation to asylum, to be a country that's able to offer asylum to those who need it is to be privileged in this world. We should be grateful for that privilege and grateful to be able to offer it. One of the ugliest aspects of this current election debate has been the anti-migrant rhetoric coming from across the political spectrum. I believe freedom of movement is one of the most important and astonishing achievements of the post-Second World War era. And I would love to think that the next generation of young people will have that right.
What's your position, Liberal Democrat position on free movement?
It's good for the country and it's good for people.
Sorry, free movement, Alec.
I'll come to... I'll come to free movement in a moment, but in a rare moment of consensus, I agree with Patrick about the level of debate. And welcome, Comfort. I'm glad you made it here. Nobody chooses to put their child in a leaky boat unless the water is safer than what they're fleeing on the land behind. And the rhetoric that we heard from an activist from a national political party yesterday talking about using those refugees as target practice isn't welcome in our communities, it's not welcome in our politics, and it's not welcome in our country.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, before we move on, I want to hear from someone else who's got a business. Karina Contini, you, Karina Contini, have a number of businesses, and you are struggling right now, not down the line, down in terms of renegotiation with Barnier or whatever. You need people now, and where do you want them to come from?
I think it's so frustrating that the only two parties that are actually talking about going back into Europe are the only two parties that will not be able to give us a result at this Westminster election. We employ about 160 people. Probably before the pandemic, we would have had maybe 120 people doing the same work. So we need more bodies to fill the same number of jobs, but we've got a smaller pool of being able to source them. Yeah, we really miss that European support and skill.
Well, another party who is standing in every constituency here in Scotland with migration at the top of their agenda is Reform. Nick, again, their campaign, please.
Yes, well, Richard Tice, until a few weeks ago, was the leader of Reform UK until he was ousted by somebody called Nigel Farage. He was in Falkirk a few days ago, interestingly stressing that their focus in their campaign is on growth, growth, growth. Now, there's an opinion poll out today, Redfield and Wilton, suggesting that Reform is on 8% in Scotland. That's up 4%. They do like to point out that they have been a presence here. Their predecessor party, the Brexit Party, got one of the 6 MEPs in the Scottish European parliamentary elections in 2019, and they actually came second. I mean, it was 14.8%. Let's just, I'm sure Kate would like to remind us that the SNP in that election got 37.8%. But John Curtis, the great polling guru, he's essentially saying that you have to be realistic, that Reform UK is not talking about winning parliamentary seats in Scotland, but what they are talking about is potentially eating into the Conservative vote, though not as dramatically as they might do in England and Wales.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Well, there is a conundrum in Scotland at this election. Opinion polls suggest that the SNP's decade-long dominance of Scottish politics is looking weaker, but support for independence is still solid. The latest poll from Redfield and Wilson today puts yes for independence at 46 and no at 48. Let's hear now from Pervez Mohammed. You would like to raise the issue of independence. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think just now I would say the momentum has gone sort of down a touch, in the sense that people up and down the country now, their priorities are like the cost of living, you know, not sort of, you know, getting the service that they need from the NHS, and just basically surviving with, obviously, they can't heat their houses. They need, financially, it's such a higher priority now, rather than solving the independence question. However, with regards to independence, there's a couple of questions that's never been answered. One is the currency. Are we still going to sort of retain the pound, or are we going to have the euro, or is going to be another currency? And the second thing is, would you go back into the EU, yes or no?
Well, yes, I might put that, but I want to hear from you more, because I think I'm right in saying you voted SNP last time round.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And what are you thinking this time?
This time I'm actually a floating voter just now.
You're a floating voter?
Because I've not made a decision quite yet as to which party to vote for just now.
Well, I'm sure Kate Forbes will pick up on your point in a minute, but I'd like a show of hands now. Who here in the audience supports independence and voted SNP last time? Could you raise your hands? OK, please keep your hands up if you support independence and you're considering voting a different way this time. Well, that's interesting. Can I hear from the gentleman here behind Sahara? Why are you thinking that you might alter your vote?
I'm an undecided voter on the basis that the current SNP government has been in power for a number of years. They haven't, in my opinion, effected enough change and governed effectively. And as a result, I don't have faith that we can do it as an independent country. You don't have faith? Do you have faith in the idea of independence, but not the vehicle? I believe that we should have the right to self-determination.
Right. Right, can I just hear from the gentleman? You had your hand up and then you brought it down, I think, but you're not sure how you're going to vote. Can we hear from, I think there's two voters. We'll hear from you in a minute, but can we hear from you too?
Hi, yes, thank you. My doubt has come about because I haven't really, this time around, seen any convincing information as to why the SNP will deliver on independence.
What do you think, apart from independence, what about, there's track records on, for example, on education? The last PISA study showed that as far as we were going, 2022 was the last one, compared to 2018, we were going backwards on maths, science and reading. Is there something about the fundamentals that worry you?
Yes. I mean, I've been in education all my life, and what is absolutely clear is that there's been a continuous decline in the quality of students coming through. And it's purely because of the way the funding structures have been undermined by the system.
Right. Thank you very much. I want to put this to Kate Forbes because, Kate Forbes, there seems to be a conversation here in this room that the SNP has squandered the support for independence, that the support that was there before, and part of the way that you've squandered it is on the fundamental thing that Scotland used to be so proud of, and that's education.
So can I say directly to those who voted SNP before or thinking of doing so again, in this election you have an opportunity to declare your preferences, and we know that the SNP has had a difficult year, but that support for independence has remained robust. And that means in this election...
A difficult year is a kind of understatement. I mean, honestly, I actually seriously mean it. It is an understatement. And I think that over the last 2 years, problems have been, and you presumably would put your hand on your heart and say this, of entirely your own making.
Well, I've owned the fact it's been difficult. I'm not shying away from that. But I am saying that if you support independence, there's only one party standing at this election that will be able to affect any sort of change. And people are voting for different reasons. How? But I think they're primarily voting for change.
Well, that's interesting. You talk about how. Let me just put that to Ian Murray. Well, how? Because what John Swinney said was... Hang on a minute, Ian. What John Swinney said was, if in this general election a majority of MPs returned, or SNP, then that forms a mandate for another referendum. And the question really is, Kate Forbes' question is, are there any circumstances in which a Labour government would ever grant a referendum to Scotland again? Oh, well, obviously it was David Cameron last time, but on independence and the Lib Dems.
I think the very fact that the rule of thumb here is the majority of MPs would then start negotiation is ludicrous.
So I mean, there's no way.
But I think it goes to the original... And I think, hold on, let me at least attempt to answer the question. I don't think it's the 2 years of the difficulties in the SNP that's the problem here. I think it's 17 years and 14 years, respectively, of complete failure from both governments. And yes, this is a change election because people are worried about their bills. We've heard it all tonight. The priorities of this... I've knocked on thousands of doors in this election, and everyone's talking about everything but the Constitution.
So in that case, I want to bring Alex Cole.
The delivery of change come Friday is Rishi Sunak packing his bags and a brand new Labour government that can affect change across the whole of the United Kingdom. That's the change.
I want to bring Alex Cole-Hamilton in this because, Alex Cole-Hamilton, one of the issues is whether or not, if it is an incoming Labour government, there would actually be a remaking and a reinforcing of devolution. Do you think that would happen?
I hope that there would be a discussion about that, and I'm sure that a new government would treat Scotland with more respect. But Kirsty, my eldest son is 16. He'll cast his first vote in the next Holyrood election. He and his classmates have only ever known this debate, this constitutional debate. It's held them back, it's held their education back, and it's what I hear on the doorstep. So, like Ian, I've knocked 10,000 doors in this election, and people don't talk about independence. They're talking about getting a GP at the first time of asking, and getting a GP appointment, getting an NHS dentist to deliver care in their locality, fixing their children's education, getting our schools back up the international league tables, getting the sewage out of our rivers.
But in that case, how does anybody work out why the support for independence, Patrick, is solid?
Well, I think increasingly people recognise that independence doesn't belong to one political party, and many independence supporters recognise that as well. But I'll tell you, one of the threads that's run through every issue that we've discussed tonight is the chronic inequality in our society. That's why the cost of living crisis has hit unequally in our society. That's why COVID and Brexit hit unequally in our society. That's why 15 years of Tory austerity has hit unequally in our society. And it's why the transition to net zero is so difficult to achieve without those full powers. We can make this a transition to a fairer and more equal society, but we lack the ability to do that. The chronic inequality. The UK is one of the richest countries in the world, one of the richest countries there's ever been in the world, and yet that wealth is hoarded by the very, very few, and it's not being invested. What we're hearing is a lack of promise of investment from either of the UK parties in restoring our public services and in investing for the future.
And the accusation, Miles Briggs, is that the Conservatives allowed this to happen.
Well, I don't agree with that, but what's clear from the audience is you want the politicians standing at this election to get back to your priorities, not independence. And I think this is where, in a week's time, I'm not a clairvoyant, but I can tell you, Kate and John Swinney will be declaring it's time for another independence
You're not
referendum.
a clairvoyant, but do you think the Conservatives are going to win?
So in Scotland, I think this is a great opportunity for us. And I say this because across Scotland, every seat is marginal. Every one of us are fighting key seats across Scotland. And in these key seats in Scotland, where it's an SNP Conservative fight, voting reform will help, Kate. It will hand these seats to the SNP. So I ask people to think, where do they live? Who can take the SNP out at this election? Because this can be the last independence election we ever face if we can defeat the SNP.
But Miles Briggs, how do you explain 46% in the latest poll out today support independence, 48 don't? That would seem to me that in the lifetime of this Conservative government, if anything, independence has kind of dug in. You haven't eaten away. I mean, do you remember famously, you know, George Robertson, you know, obviously not of your party, said that devolution was going to kill independence stone dead. There is still sufficient support for independence for some people to say there should be another referendum. What do you make of that?
So I don't want us to see our country return to those divisions of the past. We had that referendum. They still exist. And I think that's one thing over time we need to rebuild that. Well, but this election will be the chance to do that.
Well, let me just bring in some voices. Let me bring in some voices from the audience. First of all, I'm going to take the gentleman with the mic there, and then I'm going to take the gentleman with the blue T-shirt on in front. So your question, please.
Thank you. I want to come back on education.
Yes.
I'm a yes voter, but I can no longer vote SNP because I'm a teacher. And my colleagues and I in colleges and schools feel utterly let down by this SNP government. 3,500 teachers you promised us. 3,500 teachers would end teacher precarity in early primary teachers' careers. It would end our workload crisis, but that's a promise broken. Yeah. Our college lecturers right now the SNP are kind of posing as defenders of workers' rights. Meanwhile, you're standing aside while college lecturers are being deemed by their employers. You cannot seriously expect voters who are teachers and lecturers to continue to vote for you.
Kate Forbes.
Yeah. Can I say that I hear those challenges, and I've already owned some of the difficulties that we face. But the choice in this election is to deliver real, proper change at the root.
17 years.
No, so, and the big challenge that the big challenges that we face across the board, whether it's the NHS, whether it's in education or in our other public services, is ultimately the impact of austerity at source.
College lecturers haven't had a pay rise since 2021. Will you step in? Will you step in and help the college lecturers?
I know that Graham Day is engaging, and we want to see this resolved, and we want to see a deal resolved. But at the end of the day, this is why independence is not completely distinct from the core issue. Because whether it's talking about immigration, the cost of living crisis, or
is there anyone in here for whom is there anyone in here for whom independence will determine their vote or not? One, two. Gentleman who's got the microphone in the front, tell me what you make of this debate.
I think the SNP have been an absolute disaster for Scotland for a long, long time. You look at the schools, the education, NHS, the ferries, the amount of millions you wasted on that. Every time Patrick Harvey talks about the cost of living, every time you open your mouth, more tax, more tax, more tax. You wanted to tax people just for parking at work, £500 a year.
No.
That's working class people like me.
The workplace parking
and I'm a care worker. I work in the care sector.
By employers, not by employees.
Yes, you were disagreeing there. The gentleman with the hat on. Could you take the microphone, please, just a second? Thank you very much. You want to say something? Yes. About independence.
Independence is going to be part of the solution to fix a lot of the problems in Scotland. So, to me, it's important to get it. And the fact that you keep on just ignoring the fact that we voted in the SNP, but I wasn't stupid when I signed up. Voted for, I knew what I was getting. I wanted an independence referendum. The fact that you keep just ignoring the fact and dodging the question about it.
Thank you very much. I just want to take
you have an election every 5 years, and Ireland get to decide every 7 years.
Okay, can I just take a quick point from the young woman in the front? Thank you.
Hi. So more than one party here has been using the word change an awful lot. And if we reflect on the last 4 years, you know what, for a lot of people, change has been really frightening. I'm here as a member of Living Rent, and, for example, I know it's harking back a bit to the cost of living crisis, but it relates. The change in housing situation has been terrifying for many. The rent cap coming off has been terrifying.
Thank you very much for ending with such an incredibly important thing about the housing crisis. I'm afraid we've run right out of time, and there we must leave it. Thank you to our politicians. Thank you to everybody who took part tonight in the audience here in Glasgow. Victoria's back on Monday on election week. Until then, have a great weekend. Sleep well. Good night.